you guys doing? Are we good today? Hasn't this been like the most incredible August ever? Like seriously, it's like gorgeous every day. If you work on the beach, I guess your life's pretty good. My son works on the beach. Gets money for hanging there, so. Well, my name's Chris. Welcome to our service this morning. And I'm one of the pastors here, and I get the privilege of opening the Word and going through a story, continuing our series on ordinary people. So if you're new, visiting, if you're an ordinary person, you've come to the right place, because you're amongst a whole bunch of ordinary people. So, and if you think you're extraordinary and I just dissed you, well, that's too bad for you. You need to listen to the series. So, all right, let's get going here. So today's title is The Slave Girl, How People Find God. So we're going to investigate a character that's not very well known, but I'm very excited about it. So have you ever wondered, and I've wondered this a lot. So we've been in Cold Lake for over 20 years. We know lots of people. Have you ever wondered or even asked God, like, how do people find God? How do, not just people general, but people that you know and love. How do they find God? And it's interesting language because God's not hiding, right? But how do you find him? How do you like, as a Christian, how do I introduce this Jesus that I know who's alive and to someone who's like, I don't know what you're talking about, dude. Well, that's nice. Oh, thanks for praying for me. That's great. Right? How do people actually come to faith? How do they find God? I've asked that a lot. I have lots of friends. In fact, right now, I'm thinking of all of these different people that I know and love who don't know Jesus, whether it's through hockey or through the schools or through church or youth group or whatever, that I know that they don't know Jesus. And in my heart, I'm like, I want them to know Jesus. I want them to know who God is. I want them to be able to see life differently. And so that's what our story is actually about today. And I want to hone it down into, like, how does the average person from Cold Lake who has a good paying job, a great place to live, educated, lots of toys, lots of options for recreation, entertainment, and family fun, how does a person like this find God? And so I think our story is going to answer it for us today. It's a story about the slave girl, and the story is actually not about the slave girl. She's a key character. But it's found in 2 Kings chapter 5. And so just a little bit of context coming into, where we're landing in the Old Testament here. There's been a string of kings that have in Israel who have been unfaithful to God. They're not good kings. In fact, the Bible says that they did evil in the eyes of the Lord. And Jehoram is the king of Israel at the time, and he's quite a character in quite a few of the stories, although he just makes a very short appearance in this one. But Israel has constantly been at war with Syria for years, maybe decades. Like, it just seems like it goes on and on and on and on. Also known as Aram. In fact, the text that we're reading today mentions Aram, but that's Syria. And so what's happening is the Syrians are on the winning side of this war right now. It's constant. Neither side has ever completely won the victory and just decimated the other people. However, we see that the Syrians are definitely it's taking a toll on Israel, and they're sending out raiding parties, and they're pillaging and destroying and killing the people of Israel, and taking and trafficking the women and children. And so that's where we find ourselves in. And so it's desperate times in Israel in 2 Kings chapter 5. So you can turn there. We're going to read the whole story with a little bit of commentary to kind of help us understand the cultural context of the time and what we're getting into. Now, before we even start, one thing we need to notice is that as a reader, if you've been reading along, chapter 5 is supposed to surprise you, jolt the reader, you could say. It's like, what? And there's a number of reasons for that. And we're going to get into it in just the first couple verses. Now Naaman was commander of the army of the king of Aram. It's like, oh, what? We're introduced to somebody who's What? So that's the first surprise. Whoa, we're not talking about Israel right now. He was a great man in the sight of his master and highly regarded. And here's the next thing that's surprising. Because through him, the Lord had given victory to Aram. So the first verse gives us context for the entire story to be read. That God is behind this. God's sovereignty is elevated right off the start. That God is claiming responsibility for Aram's victory and Naaman's greatness. Now we will see in the story, Naaman is not giving God the credit for that. However, that's how the reader is supposed to read it. He was a valiant soldier, but he had leprosy. Now, as I read through the commentators, this is a masterful first paragraph, one sentence in the Hebrew. And it just, this amazing guy, so great, so awesome, has everything. And then it just drops, but he had leprosy. And it kind of gives you this like, oh, wow, what an opening statement. Now, bands of raiders from Aram had gone out and had taken captive a young girl from Israel, and she served Naaman's wife, so she was a slave. She said to her mistress, "If only my master would see the prophet who is in Samaria, he would cure him of his leprosy." Now, just a side note. In this patriarchal society, this girl's at the bottom of status. Number one, she's a slave. Number two, she's an Israelite, whom the Syrians considered to be dogs. Number three, she's a woman, a young woman. And in those days, the older you are, the more elevated you were. It's the opposite of our culture, right? We idolize youth. Well, theirs was the opposite. And so she had no standing at all. And this is, so she speaks up. But we'll get to her in a little bit. So what is Naaman going to do with that? Well, because he didn't actually he didn't say it directly to Naaman, said it to his wife. But if you really want a man to do something, right, what do? Talk to his wife. Naaman went to his master and told him what the girl from Israel had said. "By all means go," the king of Aram replied. Another surprise. What? We're going to go to another nation? "I will send a letter to the king of Israel." So Naaman left, taking with him 10 talents of silver, 6,000 shekels of gold, and 10 sets of clothing. Now, just trying to figure out how much wealth that is. It is an unbelievable amount. A lot. Right? This is a treasure. This is the ability to set someone up for life. The letter that he took to the king of Israel read, "With this letter I am sending my servant Naaman to you, so that you may cure him of his leprosy." As soon as the king of Israel read the letter, he tore his clothes and said, "Am I God?" This is Joram, remember? "Can I kill and bring back to life? Why does this fellow send someone to be cured of his leprosy? See how he is trying to pick a quarrel with me." Right? So this is the king of Israel going like, what in the world is going on? And so we need to stop here for a second. What's going on here? Now, again, surprise of the reader is that in those days, everyone thought, like all the peoples believed except the people of Israel, and in fact they probably believed it too because they were very much influenced by the cultures around them, that the strongest God won the battles. That the strongest God created the strongest nation. So whichever nation was dominating, they had the most powerful gods. Not only that, the structure was that the whole religion of each of these each of these kingdoms was really an extension of the kingdom itself. Because they believed that the king was the image of the gods. And so what happened is that the monarchy gets to decide how everything works. they use the religion and so really the monarchy is, their priests and everything and how it worked. Well, the monarchy kind of got to decide how that would go. And so all of these things were an extension of all of these religions, were the extension of the cultures of the time. Now, this is a common belief today and we see that like in all around the world, but it's also a false belief, that Christianity is also one of those, simply an extension of culture. But today's story is going to show something different, that the God of the Bible transcends culture. And it's one of the reasons why this is such a significant story and that I really wanted to tell it today. So Naaman, it appears that he has tried everything in Syria. There's no way he would go to the Israelite God, especially when Syria is winning. That means their gods are more powerful. But he's desperate. And so he takes everything that he probably has tried already. So he's really what he's doing, he's trying the same thing somewhere else. Connections, right? He's got a ladder. Gold, like wealth. He's bringing wealth. Resources. Because in those days, if you wanted the favor of the gods, you had to appease them with resources. And power. He's a powerful man, right? He's coming with an entourage, chariots. Showing up with gusto, right? To the king of Israel with a huge demand. Now, the king of Israel rightly says, like, what are you talking about? Am I God? He's like, I can't do this. Like what you're asking of me. But what it reveals to us is the king of Israel is one of those people that knows about God. He knows that God can do this, right? He says it. Am I God? That I can take life, give life? So he knows about God, but he doesn't know God. There's no relationship here between God and the king. It's just I know about God. And so, of course, he tears his robes, right? I don't have a relationship with this God. And he's basically saying, you've come to the one place where the monarchy doesn't decide what the gods are going to do. And where the prophet isn't a puppet of the king. So he's just like, if you're thinking that you're going to do the same thing you did in Syria, yeah, good luck. Tears his robes. You see, I think this is a picture. God is not an extension of the Israelite culture, Yahweh. He's not an extension of simply Israel, the nation. And that's highlighted with the king's craziness, right? It's actually it's almost comical. All right, we need to keep going here. So what happens? When Elisha, the man of God, heard that the king of Israel had torn his robes, he sent him this message. Why have you torn your robes? Have the man come to me, and he will know that there is a prophet in Israel. So Naaman went with his horses and chariots, his entourage, right? And stopped at the door of Elisha's house. Elisha sent a messenger to him to say, go, wash yourself 7 times in the Jordan, and your flesh will be restored, and you will be cleansed. So how's Naaman going to receive that? But Naaman went away angry. For one thing, he's a very important man, right? Possibly the most powerful man in the world at this point. Definitely the most powerful man in Syria. And the prophet didn't even come out to meet him himself. He sent a messenger. Right, can you see what's going on? Like Elisha just very masterfully does this. It's so obviously that God has orchestrated this whole thing. But Naaman went away angry and said, I thought that he would surely come out to me and stand and call on the name of the Lord his God, wave his hand over the spot, and cure me of my leprosy, right? He's mad. I'm an important person. Why didn't Elisha come out and have a big show for me? Why didn't he earn his cash here and all this wealth that I'm bringing and resources? This is crazy. Right? He's angry. His pride, arrogance has just kind of blinded him from the opportunity that's been given him. Forget that, right? So what's he going to do? Well, now we get into a little bit of nationalism and maybe a little racism here. Are not Albania and Pharpar, the rivers of Damascus, better than all the waters of Israel? Right? He's just going like, he's doing my dad's tougher than your dad. The kids still do that these days? My dad's stronger than your dad. I mean, I did that all the time. Because I thought my dad was super powerful. Because I received the power a few times. I was on the wrong end of that power. Couldn't I wash and be cleansed in them? So he turned off, and went away in a rage. Right? So he is just irate. His pride's been hurt. He's done this big trip all the way to Samaria. Are you kidding me? So he's upset. Naaman's servants went to him and said, "My father, if the prophet had told you to do some great thing, would you not have done it? How much more then when he tells you, wash and be cleansed?" So Naaman, this is awesome. Naaman listens to the servants. So what does he do? So he went down and dipped himself in the Jordan 7 times as the man of God had told him, and his flesh was restored, and he became clean like that of a young boy. Wow. Then Naaman and all his attendants went back to the man of God and stood before him and said, "Now I know there is no God in all the world except in Israel." We got to pause here for a second. That is not the natural thing for Naaman to say. Remember, he lives in a pluralistic society. There's lots of gods. What Naaman should have said, so what the reader is ready for here, knowing about the cultures, Naaman should have said, "Oh, wow, the God of Israel is stronger than our God." That's what he should have said as a pluralistic man. And so what this text is emphasizing, something else has happened to Naaman. There has been a transformation. There has been a complete shift, and we'll see it in the following verses, because this statement is surprising, especially from the context in the world that Naaman lives. He has now announced that there is no other God in all the world except here. Let's keep on keeping on here. So please accept a gift from your servant, right? He's coming, he's full of joy and thankfulness. He's not coming to pay with his resources to get the healing. He's got it already. Right? This is a huge indication of transformation. He's still going back to the prophet because he wants to thank him, and he wants to give gifts. So what's Elisha going to do? The prophet answered, "As surely as the Lord lives whom I serve, I will not accept a thing." And even though Naaman urged him, again, this evidence of this, he wants to. Doesn't feel obligated anymore. He really wants to give because God's changed his heart. He's become generous, right? Urged him, but he refused. "If you will not," said Naaman, "please let me, your servant, be given as much earth as a pair of mules can carry." It's very odd, but we're going to save this one for a little bit later. We'll get into it. "For your servant will never again make burnt offerings and sacrifices to any other god but the Lord. But may the Lord forgive your servant for this one thing. When my master enters the temple of Rimmon to bow down and he's leaning on my arm," this is his right-hand man, right? The king of Aram's right-hand man is Naaman. "And I have to bow there also. When I bow down in the temple of Rimmon, may the Lord forgive your servant for this." Wow, that's a pretty hard request, considering all the things the Jews had to do. So what's Elisha going to say? Shalom. Go in peace. What? Now this has gone from shock to scandal. What? He can't do that. But we'll get into that in a few minutes. Let's keep going in the story, because it would be nice if the story ended there, but it doesn't. After Naaman had traveled some distance, Gehazi, the servant of Elisha, the man of God, said to himself, "My master was too easy on Naaman, this Aramean, by not accepting from him what he brought. As surely as the Lord lives," interesting statement, that's what Elisha said, right? I will run after him and get something from him. So Gehazi hurried after Naaman. When Naaman saw him running towards him, he got down from the chariot to meet him. Remember when he came to Elisha's place? Didn't get out of the chariot, did he? The messenger came, he just stood there. Another indication of transformation, right? He gets out, he's excited. Oh, it's the messenger from Elisha. Gets out of his chariot. Is everything all right, he asked. Everything's all right, Gehazi answered. My master sent me to say, 2 young men from the company of the prophets have just come to me from the hill country of Ephraim. Please give them a talent of silver and 2 sets of clothing. So what's Naaman going to do here? By all means. And again, generosity comes through. Take 2, let's double it, said Naaman, and urged Gehazi to accept them. And when he tied up the talents of silver in 2 bags with 2 sets of clothing, he gave them 2 of his servants, and they carried them ahead of Gehazi. When Gehazi came to the hill, he took the things from the servants and put them away in the house. So he hid them. He sent the men away, and they left. When he went in and stood before his master, Elisha asked, "Where have you been, Gehazi?" "Your servant didn't go anywhere," Gehazi answered. But Elisha said to him, this is an interesting, very interesting statement. "Was not my spirit with you when the man got down from the chariot to meet you?" Whoa. Wow, right? And we've mentioned this before in previous stories. When there's a character that is flawless in the story, it's because he's usually embodying either some of the attributes, character, something about God. And right now he's embodying God's sight, that nothing can get past God. He sees it all. And the prophet is representing God here. Is this the time to take money or accept clothes? So Elisha is inferring that there is a time for that. But is this the time? Or olive groves and vineyards, or flocks and herds, or male and female slaves? Because remember the cultural context? You have to appease the gods. Elisha does not want Naaman, because this isn't just we made a Syrian happy. This Syrian has been transformed. His heart has been changed. And so this is not the time. And here is the hardest part of this whole story. Naaman's leprosy will cling to you and your descendants forever. Then Gehazi went from Elisha's presence, and his skin was leprous. It had become as white as snow. Good story, right? Isn't that awesome? What a story. It shows us so, there is no way I could have time to delve into how much the character of God is revealed in this, and there's so much in it. But we're gonna do a few things, and we're gonna answer that original question. Well, how do people find God? So how do you become a seeker of God? A couple weeks ago, we mentioned something that I think is really important. And so the first question, we'll get to that in a second. The first question is, why do people seek God? Because that precedes how they find him. Well, why? Why would you want to seek God? Because here's our nature. Here's where we are. Romans 3, right? No one is righteous. No one seeks God. In our natural state, no one seeks God. Even though Solomon in Ecclesiastes chapter 3 says that God has placed eternity in the hearts of humans, so that the temporary things of the world, they can't satisfy us. They can't. And yet, the continual kind of striving of humanity is to try to fill the eternity with temporary things that won't last. And it can't. So how do you become a seeker then? Well, first of all, I think for those to become a seeker, they must come to see that self-sufficiency is a lie. This is our story. This is Naaman. Right? Success. I have it all. But there will always be something that comes along that will ruin your plans or your dreams for your life. No matter how well you've designed it, no matter how successful you've been, no matter how much money you've made or how many friends you have, how much status you have, something will come along and ruin it. We would like to call it a problem, right? So what comes along? A problem. Life, it's not going to be smooth. It's not going to be easy. But something in us keeps lying to us and saying, it is going to be easy. It should be easy. But it's not going to be. Just look at human history. It's been striving since the beginning. And so how does that happen? What kind of problem? Well, first of all, there's two kinds. Outside problems. So it's outside of you, right? So doc calls, you get a diagnosis. And in a few seconds, the lie of self-sufficiency is turned on its head. Because now you've realized you're not in control of your life. That there are outside factors that are in control. One phone call can do that. A death in the family, a death of a loved one. Right? Whole world's turned upside down. It's not in your control. The market crashes, and you just made a move, and you lose your savings. Your career gets derailed, whether it's your fault or not. All of a sudden, your dreams and aspirations of moving up in the company get crushed. Oh. Right? Outside forces. Broken relationships. Struggling. It gets you to that point where, maybe I'm not in control. Maybe this whole idea of leaning on myself and digging deep within, maybe it doesn't work. And that's where we see Naaman. Right? He's actually willing to go to the enemy, Israel. Leprosy. But Naaman had leprosy. So inside forces also, right? Pride. See this with Naaman. He's got both. He's got outside and inside. And the truth is, we all do. Bitterness. Unforgiveness. Addiction. Hatred. Forces from within inside of us can also expose the lie of self-sufficiency as these things destroy us from the inside. And then we find that maybe people who were even once our friends are now like anticipating our downfall. Because these things warp us, they change us. See, your life is far more fragile than you think, than I think. Now, this was interesting, just thinking through this myself, going like, how self-sufficient am I? Wow, The illusion that you're in control of your life must be exposed for the lie that it is. So that's the first thing. The second, so lots of people are in this, but they still don't seek God, right? So there must be a second thing. And so the second thing is that you must come to see that the world can't help you. Right? Naaman's tried everything. Everything in Syria. He's probably gone to the priests and whatever. We just mentioned that a few minutes ago. He's tried it all. Nothing works. The world can't help me. So he goes to Israel under the same impression. The world's got to help me, maybe just over here. But he's confronted by something that is not of the world. And so Naaman has everything in the world, right? Everything that we can dream of. Fame, power, wealth, status, success, valiant warrior, commander of the greatest army of the world at that time. He's got it all. And I just love how that first sentence, but he had leprosy. And the leprosy remained no matter what he did. He knew the world couldn't help him. And so I think these two factors have to, before people become a seeker, right? No one seeks. In order to flip that over, in order to become a seeker, problem, right? Problems have to come into your life. All right, so then how do people find God? So we start off with these two things. What next? Well, here's the hurdle in our nature. We feel We feel the need that we have to earn, or that we need to deserve something, right? Or that maybe even like it's the opposite. We're like, oh, navel gazing. Oh, I can't take that. It's actually all stemming out of pride, by the way, to deserve salvation. And we want what God can do for us more than we want God. So these are the hurdles that get in the way for coming to finding God. So what's Naaman's initial response is anger, but why? What's at the core? What has Elisha asked him to do? Right? That's too easy, right? This is the first thing. That's too easy, right? The servants know him, right? They're like, if Elisha told you to do some grand thing, like go wrestle a lion, you would have done it. Yeah, I would have, right? Because I'm a valiant warrior. I would have made sure my sword was sharp. But I'd have done it. If he'd have told me to climb the highest mountain, I'd have done that. If he'd have told me I had to do some great deed, I'd have done that. Because if just think about it. At the core of all of our culture's stories, isn't that the issue? There is some massive thing that you have to overcome to be saved. Isn't that the epic struggle? All these amazing movies that we love. So they have these gospel themes that you're overwhelmed. But it's not a look up approach. It's look in, find the strength within, and away you go. And then, we celebrate at the end. That's the storyline. But that doesn't happen. Look at Naaman. Perfect example. Doesn't happen. It's too easy. Anybody could do that, right? A baby can do that. Go wash in the Jordan, what? Like a little kid. I'm not a little kid. I'm a military man. Great prowess. I will say it now because I'm going to say what I was going to say. I was going to say, like the fighter pilots, right? No. Flying jets. Sorry, they're pilots. Right? So it's just like, and it's too easy. And then, secondly, right attached to that, it's too inclusive. It's for all, it's for anyone. You mean I don't have to deserve it? I don't have to it's now not just about earning it. Don't have to be like this type of person for God to save? Like, what kind of God is this? So Naaman goes off in a rage. And so 2 shifts in thinking have to happen in order for people to find God. The first is that I can't earn it. And I don't deserve it. I can't get to the point where I do deserve it. Ever. Right? Because the second one is more attached. If you've been a Christian for a while, you kind of slip into that, I kind of deserve. I've done this, I put my time in, blah, 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 blah. Read all the Bible, did this and that, and went to church and tithed and did all the stuff I'm supposed to do. I deserve something. We'll get to that in a minute. So you've got to come to this point where you've got to realize that maybe this is the most difficult thing. Because let's just think about life and us. The easy way, right? We even have commercials. Staples, the easy button. We're all like, yeah, that would be good. Even our own bodies function that way, where they'll go the easy route every time. If it was really that easy, wouldn't everybody be doing it? Seriously. Right? If it was easy to make $1 million, like super easy, wouldn't everyone do it? Of course. It's not easy. Why? Because before you get to the point where you realize that you can't earn it, you have to humble yourself. Naaman has to humble himself because his view of himself is too high. He's got to humble himself. And it's our pride that's something even if we agree with the words, oh yeah, oh no, this doesn't seem that easy, but we don't do it. Well, it's because it's hard. It is hard to lay it all down, and it's not on you. You don't deserve the salvation that you have. Secondly, and we find this in the New Testament with Jesus. Secondly, the shift in thinking is, I need forgiveness and reconciliation with God more than I need my problem to be fixed. in order to truly find God. That is the next shift in thinking. Because here's what happens lots. Someone seeks God, they've gone through this whole thing. They may even said, forgive me for my sin or whatever. But at the core, they still want their problem fixed more than they want Jesus. And so when Jesus doesn't fix the problem after they've made this confession of faith, this is the statement I hear over and over. Yeah, I tried religion or I tried Jesus, but didn't work. Well, no, of course it didn't work. You can't try Jesus. What you're doing is trying to make Jesus into your servant so that you can get him to do what you want him to do, so that you can live the life that you want. And then he didn't come through for you, so it was his fault. I tried it. No, you didn't. You tried what you've always been trying, so in order to get your own way. You just threw Jesus into the mix. This is where the statement comes in that's so important for Naaman. He isn't just another God. I'm just going to try this God now. There is no other God but this one. And so we see this with Jesus. A number of times in the New Testament, people come for healing. And instead of Jesus pronouncing, if whatever you have, be healed, sometimes Jesus has said, your sins are forgiven, and the person was healed. What? In fact, he does it once, and, he does it a whole bunch of times, but in this specific spot, the religious leaders get super angry. You can't do that. Only God can forgive sin. Oh, we know that Jesus was God. But how does Jesus respond? Well, is it easier for me to say, get up, pick up your mat, and walk? Which the guy does. What's Jesus doing there? He's highlighting something. That the person who had this disease, his main need was forgiveness and relationship with God. That's our main need. And so until you get to that point, you might try God, but there's not going to be the transformation that Naaman had. Naaman's not trying God. He's going all in. So, in our story, let's continue. What happens? So what happens when people find God? What are the marks of this, of finding God? Truly finding him? Well, there's one mark. Transformation. Right? We're made into something new. This is what we see in Naaman. A complete transformation happens. Starts with this confession, there is no other God. Right? And he is full of joy, thankfulness, generosity. It's just coming out of him, right? So we need to understand who we are in the story. We're not Elisha. We are not Elisha. We are Naaman. Because this isn't just a story about someone coming to faith. It's not just a gospel-themed story. It's what we do when we have problems. If you continually seek the world, if you continually rely on yourself, you're just going to keep spinning. And you have to get to the point where you go to God, where you realize he's the only one that can actually help. And here's the other thing about Naaman. Before we get to Naaman. So let's say you become a Christian, say yes to Jesus on a Tuesday night. What happens on Wednesday morning? Work. I got to go back to work. So in our story, this is what's going on. Naaman has this incredible experience happen, and he's given himself to the God of Israel. And now he's got to go back to Syria. He's got to go back to work. So this is how we're supposed to look at Naaman's conversation with Elisha. He's not asking to stay. He's not asking to become a Jew. He's going back to Syria. Another scandalous part of the story. You can't go back to Syria. But he's a Syrian. His family's there. His job's there. Everything's there. And so he makes this plea. He's like, I'm going to go back. but will the Lord forgive me for this one thing? And it's so fabulous that Elisha's like, yeah. Like, we want to put God in a box and go like, no, you can't do that. In fact, that's what Gehazi does, right? But he goes. He goes back. And so here's where I promised we'd get to the soil stuff. What is up with the bags of soil, right? So this is what I think, and just reading through the commentators and listening to a few guys, and I think he wants as much earth as possible, because every time he's going into the temple of Rimmon, he's going to put dirt on the floor to signify that he's worshiping Yahweh, not Rimmon. That's what he's taking the soil for. Because I was like, you can't make sacrifices. Like, God, there's some pretty strict rules around sacrifices. And then it was just like, yeah, oh, that's right. He's going into this foreign temple. And he's going to have church. He's going to put the dirt of Israel to signify, I'm not worshiping this God. With the king, right? Arm in arm with the king of Syria, who's worshiping this other God. This is amazing. And so Naaman's going back, going like, I'm not just going to, forget about this experience and go on with life. I'm going back and I am going to worship this God. And people are going to find out. You know what? There's no rest of the story for Naaman. We don't know. We do know that Jesus mentions him. And we'll get to that in our next point here. Which is good, because we need to finish here. A warning for God's people. So Gehazi's story is very important. It is a warning for God's people. He's not happy about what's taken place. Well, why? Let's just compare Gehazi's heart to Naaman's heart. Naaman, full of joy, thankfulness, generosity. Gehazi's heart covets, is bitter that God would do something for the enemy like that God would lavish and heal Naaman, the enemy, the commander of the enemy of Israel, who are giving them so much pain. God heals him? What? And so what comes to light is self-righteousness of Gehazi. He is looking at himself like this. And this is what's revealed. I deserve it because I'm part of God's people. That guy doesn't. Look what he's done to us. Look at the atrocities he's committed. Like, he's the commander of the army. So you think those raiding parties were going into Israel and came back and reported to Naaman, hey, guess what we did? No, he's the commander. This is strategic. Let's decimate these Israelites. So self-righteousness warps our heart, skews our ability to see, because we get into this entitled state that I deserve it. Gehazi is an Israelite serving with the prophet Elisha. What? And what's revealed here is his heart is not transformed. It's warped, it's hard. It's leprous. And so we got to talk about this very quickly. At the end, isn't it a little harsh, right? You lied. Therefore, now you get Naaman's leprosy forever. And by the way, and your descendants. It's like, what? Wow. That seems a little harsh, doesn't it? But here's what God is doing. God is making things right. God is putting on the outside of Gehazi's body what's on the inside. That leprous heart is there. Right? It's exposed in what he does and his actions. That Aramean, right? Racism. How can God do that to that guy? He's from that race. Blah, 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 right? He's all angry. Reveals that this heart has not been transformed. God takes the leprosy of his heart and puts it on his body so everyone can see. All right. We come to the end of our sermon, and you're like, why is this called the slave girl? Because this is why. Lessons from the slave girl. Let's just look at her for a couple minutes. Hope. Does she not give us hope? Is she not filled with hope? So the Hebrew word for a young girl in this one is 10 to 13 years old. She's 10 to 13 years old, and she has retained her faith. Wow. Are you kidding me? This is horrifying what's been done to her. These Syrian raids were awful. Her parents most likely were killed. At the very least, like everyone's dispersed, right? Probably her mom and maybe the other kids were taken as slaves, which they probably would have thought death was better. She has every reason in the world not to hope, to say, my life's gone. I'm hopeless. Got nothing. But she doesn't, right? So what's going on here in the slave girl? Forgiveness. Are you kidding me? Possibly the most costly forgiveness that's available. And I say costly, you're like, what? And it's not much. Somebody, you give them, $10 and they lose it. And I'm like, $10. Okay, you forgive them, right? What about this? Right? Wow, how do you forgive someone for murdering your family and taking you away from life and then trafficking you? Remember, Naaman is the commander of the Syrian army. He's responsible for the raids. In order for her to have pointed Naaman to the prophet, right? And she didn't just point him. You could hear it in her voice. There's longing. If only my master would go to the prophet who is in Samaria. Whoa. Are you kidding me? I can't help but think of Jesus' Sermon on the Mount. He says, love your enemies. I'm like, oh, here it is. Are you kidding me? She's forgiven him. Unbelievable. Atrocities committed directly against her and her loved ones. And she's just a child. Wow. What else did we learn? Character, right? We've already mentioned it a little bit. Love. There's love in that. She loves her master. You can hear it. If only he would go, he would be healed. Character is flowing out of this little girl. In one verse, we have this amazing picture. Because without the slave girl in this story doesn't ever happen. Naaman never goes to Israel. Naaman dies of leprosy. And if this little girl didn't have the character and forgiveness and hope that she had, she would have secretly laughed every time a toe or finger fell off. And I'm like, it's your just desserts. Look what you did. This is what you deserve. God's punishing you. Yeah. Now outside, of course, she's a slave. She'd been like, oh, that's terrible. She doesn't. That's character. But more than that, it's courage and faith. This is an incredible example of both of these things. See, Naaman is a dangerous man. She is pointing him towards the prophet, towards hope. It is dangerous to give somebody who's in his situation with his power hope. If you go there, you'll get healed. Right? She's putting it all on the line. She's sticking her neck out because if it doesn't happen, Naaman's coming back. What's he going to do to her? This is not going to be good. Right? And so it's this beautiful picture, courage and faith. She knows the God of Israel personally, not just about him. Because there's no way, if she just knew about him, forgiveness, character, and hope would be happening. You see, the slave girl is Naaman's suffering servant. Suffering servant is Jesus in the Bible. We find it in Isaiah chapter 52 and 53. That he would bear our sins. That he would go to the cross. That he would do the incredible deed that Naaman could never do. See, Naaman didn't realize he couldn't do what Jesus could do. Not even close. But the suffering servant would come, suffer, and die for us. And our job is to point people towards him. Just like this servant girl, the slave girl. That's Jesus. He can help. Right? I just find it part of the scandal of the story is that Elisha didn't tell him to load up the Torah and take it. You have to follow these rules and do all this stuff. What? That God's accepting Naaman blows my mind. Because somebody pointed him towards Jesus. So how does someone come to faith? How does someone find God? Problem bigger than themselves and that the world cannot fix enters your life. There's a shift in thinking. Can't earn it. I don't deserve it. And at some point, you need to want Jesus more than you want to fix your problems. And finally, you got to have somebody to point you toward Jesus. It's our job as believers. As the pages turn and the stories of one generation give way to the next, all the characters fade except for one. God. That's why he's always the hero in all of these stories. He is in every story because he is the great protagonist, the hallowed hero, the one who was and is both the author and perfecter of this epic story. It's the same story we find ourselves in today. And when the pages turn from our short cameo, the next characters will make their appearance and the story will go on. We're here for a short time, folks. So here's the question we need to ask ourselves. Will you be found faithful to the part that you have been given? If you are a believer, right? Will you be found faithful? That's what we got to ask ourselves. All of these stories come to this. We get to be part of this story. We're going to be faithful to the part. God chooses ordinary, messed up, weak, unlikely people like you and me, like the slave girl, to fulfill his extraordinary plans and purposes. God's people have been chosen, called, and sent, not because of their own talents or skills or extraordinariness, but because of him and the promise of his presence. Let's pray. Heavenly Father, thank you so much for these stories. This story just amazes me. We could stay here all day. Just marveling at the God of the Bible and what he has done and how he has paved a way to find him. That even though in our hearts we're not seeking him, that he, with grace and mercy, brings problems into our lives so that we turn to him. Help us to follow the example of Naaman here, Lord. To set down our pride, to set down the desire, or the lie that somehow the world and the wisdom of the world is going to fix our issues. Or that our resources or whatever can fix it. He can't. Lord, I pray, and I want to be part of this. I want to go to you. I want you. And I want you more than I want you to fix my problems. And I want this for our people too, Lord. We want you more than anything. Pray all these things in Jesus' name. Amen.